told you not to visit graves, but now I give you permission to visit graves. And he said, because it reminds you of the akhirah. That's one benefit, and that's the primary benefit. But there are other benefits in visiting graves. The graveyard is a good place to visit. It's good to say salam to the people. Yes, salamun alaykum ya dar qawmun mu'minin. Antum as-sabiqun wa nahnu al-lahiqun, insha'Allah. And that means, insha'Allah, is not that you're going to, inshallah, die. No, it's inshallah, you're lahiqun bidar al-mu'minin. Right? So, now traditionally though, if there was a righteous scholar who benefited with his knowledge, then a mazar was created. Now you have people blowing these places up, but historically they were honored, the ulama honored them. They differed about building the qubba over them. Imam Nawawi's fatwa was against it. They tried to build a qubba over his grave. I think 3 times a giant tree grew out of it and just broke it down every time. So, but that's a khilaf issue. Some of these people take this hadith in Sahih Bukhari that Imam Ali radiallahu anhu said, the Prophet told me to go and destroy all the graves and not leave any of them, to flatten them all. That was about the Najdi graves that they used to worship. I mean, these were like graves of their fathers that they used to worship. So this idea that you, by qiyas, in usul it's called qiyas ma' wujud al-fariq. It's a type of qiyas, but there's a difference between the two that doesn't make it applicable. So, but there's an adab to visiting these places. Now, Sheikh Abdul Hayy al-Amrawi, one of my teachers, very righteous man, in his book Al-Wa'id Ghayr Mutta'il, he mentions that the Prophet ﷺ said, "Man zara akhan fillah, lam yuzurhu illa lillah, ghafara lahu ma taqaddama min dhanbihi." If you visit a person, you only visit him for the sake of Allah, then your sins are forgiven. There's another hadith where a man was going to visit. One of the angels said, "Where are you going?" He said, "I'm visiting a brother in Allah." And he said, "That's the only reason? There's no dunya or relationship between you?" He said, "No." And then the angel said, "Tibta wa taba mamshak," you've been made pure and your journey is pure because of that niyyah. And Shaykh Abdul Hayy al-Amrawi said there's no differentiation in the hadith between the living and the dead. So when you have somebody that benefited you and you learn from them, to go and pay your respects is perfectly fine. But there's adab, and it's as simple as that. Nobody worships these people. It's haram to make dua to them. You can't you can't ask. He can't do anything. La yanfa' wa la yadur. He can't benefit you or harm you in and of himself. He can't do that. So, but this is the tradition of the Muslims for centuries. And there's abuses of this tradition, undeniably. You go to places in Egypt, Pakistan, other places, people have seen some of these things. I mean, there's definitely abuses of these things, and it's unfortunate, but that doesn't mean blow them up. It's a madness. So that's important to remember that. We're not quburiyun. This whole idea somehow is like quburiyun or something like that. There's a palpable, in the maqamat of the salihin, there's a palpable sakina that you get in there. And this has been felt by many, many people and many zuwar. And so it's good to visit them, say salam to them, ask Allah to reward them for all they've done for the ummah. He was a great scholar. He wasn't just a poet. He actually had a madrasa here. He taught tafsir. He taught hadith. He was in the hadith tradition. He had isnad and hadith. So he does have his own tradition. Much of it arose after he was dead. So the Mevlevi tradition, which was very widespread in the Muslim world, arose after he was dead. The whirling was instituted after he was dead. The whirling really is, you should look at it like a type of Tai Chi. It's like Muslim Tai Chi. People do it, they get a lot of energy out of it. It's very invigorating. I had a friend of mine who actually came here. He's an American convert to Islam. He actually learned how to do it. He died as a young man in his 30s in Medina. He's buried in Baqi', Sidi Aziz, really beautiful man. But he studied with Suleiman Dede, who was one of the Mevlevis here, and he learned how to do it. And he told me that, that just it generated an incredible amount of energy for him. He always felt much better when he was consistent in his practice. So, but it's not something, it's like exercise. It's like spiritual exercise. That's all. So, but it's very beautiful to watch. It's very beautiful to look at, and whatever it is, it's some insight into how the world works, because everything's spinning. But right now it's more of a cultural artifact in Turkey. So just see it as a remnant of a civilization that's there to look at and marvel at. But when you watch it, just try to be still and experience it. It's quite a visual experience just to watch it. I mean, it really is, and it's very beautiful. But that's my advice to all of you. If you don't feel comfortable, you don't have to go to the maqam. If you don't feel comfortable, that's fine. I don't have any problem with that. For me, those are things. There's nothing fard about it. There's nothing. It's just something. I've read a lot of Rumi, and he's probably one of the greatest human poets, recognized by the masters of literature. He's certainly considered the greatest mystical poet or spiritual poet, but even outside of his mystical aspect, just being a master of Persian, and Freydun knows a lot more about it because he knows the Persian. So that's my advice to everybody. Don't take pictures. We don't want this stuff Facebooked, and there's already, it's just. You just give these chatterboxes reason to accrue more sins. Just do them a favor, because all they'll do is just write all these horrible things, and so just don't give people fuel for that. Anyway, makes sense? Any questions about that? Assalamu alaikum ya dara qawmi al-mu'minin. Ya dara qawmi al-mu'minin. Or al-mu'minin. Assalamu alaikum ya dara qawmi al-mu'minin. Antum as-sabiquna wa nahnu al-lahiquna insha'Allah. Antum as-sabiquna wa nahnu al-lahiquna insha'Allah. Ghafar Allahu li wa lakum. You can make dua for the dead. It's one of the sunnahs of the Muslims is always to make dua for them. That's why we say, when we mention these people, we say, Rahimahu Allah, because it benefits them.
Can one request the dweller of the maqam to pray for us?
That tawassul, intercession, is a khilaf issue. The majority of scholars permit tawassul, particularly with the Prophet ﷺ. Others, they permit it only with the Prophet ﷺ, but not with others. So it's a khilaf issue. It's a fiqh issue and not an aqidah issue. This is one of the odd things about it. It's not considered an aqidah issue because nobody believes, if they're Muslim, that they can benefit or harm them. And if they do, they're a mushrik. Makes sense? If you believe that that person can benefit or harm you, you are a mushrik. The question is, does the barrier of death stop them from being able to make dua for you? I can ask you right now, Ya akhi, ad'uli. That's tawassul. I don't say, Ya akhi, give me a child for my daughter. She hasn't been able to have a child. Give her a child, brother. That's shirk. But if I say, Ya akhi, my mother's sick, make dua for her. That's tawassul. So the question is, can you do that once the barrier of death comes down? Do they have tasarruf or not? Can they make dua for you? The majority of ulama said yes, if they were salihun. Some of them said no, that إذا مات ابن آدم انقطع من عمره إلا من ثلاث. Some of them say that that's idafa. I mean, this is why you have to study balagha and usul and all these things, because that illa, some say that hasr there is idafi, it's not haqiqi. It doesn't eliminate other ways of benefiting. But those are the three primary ways of benefiting. So, وَلَوْ أَنَّهُمْ يَظَّلَمُوا أَنفُسَهُمْ جَاءُوكَ وَاسْتَغْفِرَ لَهُمَ الرَّسُولُ لَا وَجَدَ اللَّهَ تَوَّابًا رَحِيمًا. In Surah An-Nisa, Ibn Kathir, in the tafsir of that hadith, he says, he quotes the famous story of Al-Utbi, who was from the Tabi'een. He was one of the great early Salaf. And he said, Ibn Kathir, who's a student of Ibn Taymiyyah, said that Al-Utbi was in the masjid and he saw a Bedouin come to the grave of the Prophet ﷺ, and he said, Ya Rasulullah, qad qala Allahu ta'ala, and then he recited that verse, and then he said, so here I am, I've come to you, mustashfi'an, عندك, asking shafa'a, intercession, here. So he's talking to the Prophet directly. And then he quoted some lines of poetry that are still on the pillars in Medina to this day. يا خير من دفرت في القاع أعظمه فطاب من طيبهم الكاع والأكم نفسي فداء لي قبر أنت ساكنه فيه الجود والكرم والعلم والعفاف. The lines are there. So that, tawassul is the majority of our scholars said that it was permissible to ask the Prophet ﷺ to make dua for you, not to make dua to him. لا تدعوا مع الله أحدا. Don't, right? Dua, which is the belief that they're doing it, that they can benefit you or harm you, them. No, they're sabab. So it's just like going to a doctor and say, doctor, cure me. If you meant that he's the real shafi, then it's shirk. But if you meant cure me with the asbab, I know you're a sabab, your medicine are asbab, then it's majaz mursal. It goes under the category of a permissible way of speaking. I took this medicine and it really benefited me. Did it really benefit you? Well, not really. I mean, God did, but through it. Right? So, but we don't have to talk like that all the time, as long as we understand that. And so that's the point. That's where the khilaf is. So it's actually an amal. It's not an i'tiqad. Is it permissible to do that action? The belief has to be that nothing in Allah's creation harms or benefits except Allah. Huwa nafi' wa dar. So it's not an aqidah issue, but it's been made an aqidah issue by certain sects and groups. But it is a valid, some of the ulama, after the 7th century, some of the ulama from the Athari tradition, based on Ibn Taymiyyah, he was the first one to reject it. Before him, you can find nobody in the history of Islam before Ibn Taymiyyah rejected it. And if you read his book, which I've read, At-Tawassul wal-Wasila, if you read his book, it's a little confusing because in some places he indicates that yes, there's types of tawassul that are permitted. And he, in the famous dua of Uthman bin Hunayf, which is a sahih dua that Al-Bazzar relates, where he went to the Prophet and he asked him to help him get cured. And he told him to go do wudu and then make this dua. And in the dua, Atawassuru bika bi nabiyyika, I'm making a wasila with your Prophet. And then he says, Ya Muhammadu. The Prophet's not there. Shafi' fiyya. Make shafa'ah for me. And we know that the Prophet ﷺ, if you say salam alaikum, he hears it. Now people say, well, if you've got 1 billion people saying salam alaikum, how could he hear all those? You've got computers now that can work all that out. You've got computers that can monitor all the telephone calls on the planet. What, the Prophet ﷺ's brain isn't greater than a computer? Huh? He's not a Pentium. He's the whole thing. I mean, he just You can process all that information without any problems. Because we're only here, it's like ant brains. We're in this ant brain dimension, thinking this is all there is. No, there's whole, even the physical spectrum, it's just this tiny, we're only in this tiny, narrow physical light. There's this whole other spectrum of radiation, infra and ultraviolet, infrared. And we don't even know what goes beyond that, because those are the limited tools that we have to measure that stuff. And there's things we can't hear right now that are going on in this room. There's buzzing, there's humming going on at the atomic level, because we know it vibrates. You can't hear it. Dogs hear things we can't hear. Cats hear things we can't hear. So this is just a small dimension of reality that we happen to be trapped in for a period of time. But we know that there are other dimensions, and the Prophet ﷺ had access to them because he went into them. So, anyway, answer the question. Any other questions? Feel free. Speak now or forever hold your peace. What's that? That's another way. Good point. That's another type of tawassul, which is asking through the rank. And that's another way. Bijahi, If you want, the best thing is just have a good niyyah and go with love in your heart. Give salam to the person. Thank them for what they did for the ummah. To me, that's the best thing to do. Just go. Some of the salihun have mentioned reciting ikhlas 11 times. These are practices some people do. Making dua for them, things like that. Inshallah, those are the safest things to do. But the Prophet ﷺ, his jah is great with Allah. Imam al-Bayhaqi asked by the jah of the Prophet ﷺ, who might argue with Imam al-Bayhaqi? And the Prophet said, he asked by بِحَقِّ السَّائِلِينَ عَلَيْكَ. So the Prophet himself asked, بِحَقِّ السَّائِلِينَ عَلَيْكَ, by the right of those who ask you. So that's a type of tawassul. And then the tawassul with the sifat of Allah, nobody disagrees with that. Tawassul with the names of Allah, all those things, nobody disagrees with that. Tawassul bil a'mal al-salihah, nobody disagrees with that. Tawassul bil ahya, nobody disagrees with that. It's only the dead, and like I said, there's a small group that reject it, and they're entitled to their opinion. That's their opinion, and they're if you want to read their arguments, they're there. The other arguments are the majority of the scholars. And so it's as simple as that. But this whole thing of making takfir of people, that's just from Iblis. Because you're making takfir of the vast majority of scholars in the history of Islam to say that if they were asking with tawassul and things like that. But, the common people in our community are so ignorant now that it's better to avoid all these things and just, because they really are, they're ignorant. And that's min bab sadd al-dhara'i', which is a strong aspect of Imam Malik's madhab. Any other question? Mm-hmm.
So Sahaba who they say when you visit their qubur, the dua is maqbool. You do dua.
One would hope, absolutely. One would hope that, because those are places where the people are maqbool with Allah. And so, again, you're visiting people for the sake of Allah. And it's permissible to visit a brother or a sister for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And if your niyyah is sound, then it purifies you, your sins are forgiven. It's in this valid hadith. And the hadith doesn't say man zara akhan hayyan, because ziyarah is for the living and the dead. There's no indication in the hadith that it doesn't include the dead.
So just a clarification that inshallah we make salam with the belief that the awliya and the people in the grave they can hear us. And
they can hear. That's the belief. The vast majority of Ahlul Sunnah believe that the dead can hear. They hear your visit. If you say salam, they can hear the salam. That's the vast majority of ulama have said that. There's small groups say, no, once you die, you're cut off from it. But there's the Prophet ﷺ, when he went he saw Sayyidina Musa at the Kuthban al-Ahmar, it's in the Sahih Bukhari. He was praying in his qabr. And then again he sees him in Al-Aqsa. And he prayed with them. And they gave him advice. Musa gave him advice. He said, no, go back and get they'll never be able to do 50 prayers. Nasiha is action. إذا انقطع إذا مات ابن آدم, that includes everybody, including Musa. إذا مات ابن آدم انقطع من عمري إلا من ثلاث, right? علم ينتفع به, صدقة جارية, أو ولد صالح يدعو له. That didn't include nasiha, but in the hadith, which is a sahih hadith, Musa gave him nasiha, and is nasiha rewarded if it's sincere? Of course it is. So, anyway. It's sad that our ummah even debates this stuff anymore. It really is. It's important you get clarification. It's unfortunate. Like, this is not my opinion. I'm not, people say, oh, Hamza Yusuf, mubtada'. Well, I'm just, like, this is what I learned. If I thought it was the other position was more valid, then I'd be with that position. I really would, if I thought it was more valid. But when I looked, I said, gee, got 1,000 over here and you got 2 over here, I don't know. And then all these 1,000 say those 2 were wrong about this issue. And these 2 say that all those 1,000 were wrong about this issue. I don't know. I just feel seems a little safer to be over here. That's what it seems like to me. But the amazing thing is that the people that take that position, if their sheikh says anything, he's ma'soom. But these other sheikhs aren't ma'soom. They won't criticize anything that Ibn Taymiyyah says. Nothing. It's very strange. He was a human being. He made mistakes. He was a scholar in his own right. He's entitled to his opinion. He'll meet his Lord with his proofs of why he said what he said. But in those issues, he went against the previous generations about that. Also with his distinction between Tawheed al-Uluhiyyah wa Rububiyyah, things like that. So anyway, but you should respect him and say, Rahimahullah, don't go the other extreme, because some of the other side, the other camp does the same thing. And that's what they do, and then they attack. Why are you doing that? وَالَّذِينَ جَاءُوا مِن بَعْدِهِمْ يَقُولُونَ رَبَّنَا اغْفِرْ لَنَا وَلِإِخْوَانِنَا الَّذِينَ سَبَقُونَ بِالْإِيمَانِ. That's the third group, remember? The first 2 groups, right? Right? What were the 3 groups? Yeah, exactly. The Muhajirin, khalas, we're not from them. الَّذِينَ تَبَوَّأُوا الدَّارَ وَالْإِيمَانَ, Ansar, we're not from them. وَالَّذِينَ جَاءُوا مِن بَعْدِهِمْ, and those that came after him that say, we want to be from that group. So anybody sabaquna bil iman, doesn't matter who it was, we should say, Rahimahullah, aghfir lahu. If he made mistakes, aghfir lahu. So, okay?
You said the dead can hear. Is it all dead or just the pious people?
No, the Prophet spoke to the mushrikeen. The people that reject that say that was a khasisa of the Prophet. But he spoke to the mushrikeen. They were in the well. They put their bodies in the well. And he said, أَوَجَدْتُم مَّا وَعْدَ رَبُّكُمْ حَقًّا? Did you find what your Lord promised you, threatened you with was true? He spoke to them. And they asked him, Sahaba, and he said, they don't hear any less than you do. So they say that was for that particular instant. And they use a ayah in the Quran that the Prophet, la tusmi' al-mawta, that the Prophet doesn't enable the dead to hear. That was the dead of the hearts. If you read the context of the ayah, it's very clear. It's not talking about the literal dead. It's talking about the spiritually dead. So, but they use that because they don't believe in figurative speech in the Quran also. They only believe in literal. So these are, these are problems of our tradition. And in the past, this group was very marginalized. They represent a minority opinion. Now, because of a lot of wealth and, other reasons. There's other reasons. Also the confusion. ما أنتم إذا مرج الدين وسفك الدماء وظهرت الزينة والشرف البنيان. The Prophet ﷺ said in a hadith, ما أنتم, like, it's an amazing question. What are you? He didn't say who are you. He said, what are you? When your religion gets confused and blood is shed everywhere and everybody is ornamented, decked out, ظهرت الزينة, and sharaf al-bunyan, and buildings become tall. ما أنتم, what are you? So this is the time of, the deen is marij ad-din. It's confused. People are confused. He's not confused. Imam al-Ghazali, he was confused, but he got out of his confusion. So, Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Okay, everybody fine? I apologize about yesterday. I just wasn't feeling very well. And then today I had 77 pages I had to edit of something because the catalog for the college. So my apologies. And I don't like to, if I'm sleep deprived, I get a little irritable. I don't want to be irritable with anybody, so just have to excuse me. So, the Prophet ﷺ, just continuing on about some of the benefits of knowledge. The Prophet ﷺ said, الدنيا ملعونة ملعون ما فيها إلا ذكر الله سبحانه وتعالى وما والاه أو معلما أو متعلما. This dunya is mal'oon. In other words, la'an is to be far from Allah. The closest equivalent in English is damned, because it literally means al-mub'ad an rahmatillah, distance from the mercy of God. So he's saying this temporal world is a cursed place, and it's cursed what's in it, except dhikrullah. وَمَا وَالَا, and those things that help it. So if you see a forest and it reminds you of God, it's a blessing. But if it makes you forget God, then it ends up, it's actually mal'oon as far as you're really concerned, because you didn't benefit from it. And then he said, or a teacher and a learner, a student. And like I said, there's another hadith that says, أو محبا لهما أو معينا لهم أو محبا لهم. The one helping them, and at least the one that loves them. وقال صلى الله عليه وسلم إن الله وملائكته وأهل السماوات والأرض حتى النملة في جحرها وحتى الحوت في البحر لا يصلون على معلم الناس الخير. So even an ant and in the earth and the fish in the sea is asking forgiveness for a teacher of humanity that's teaching good. And the Prophet ﷺ, this is a very important hadith, which Ibn Majah relates. خرج رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم ذات يوم فرأى مجلسين أحدهما يدعون الله عز وجل ويرغبون إليه والثاني يعلمون الناس فقال أما هؤلاء فيسألون الله فإن شاء أعطاهم وإن شاء منعهم وأما هؤلاء فيعلمون الناس وإنما بعثت معلما. Very, very important hadith. ثم عدل إليهم وجلس معهم. So the Prophet ﷺ came and he saw two majlis in the masjid. One of them, they were making dua together and يرغبون إليه, and desiring God. والثاني, the second group, they were teaching people. And the Prophet said, as for these, they're making dua. If Allah wants, He'll give them. If He doesn't, He'll withhold from them. Allah لا يعطي عن بخل لا يمنع عن بخل. He doesn't withhold from miserliness. He withholds from hikmah. So He either gives or He doesn't. People call on Allah in this recent conflict, and he's not withholding because hashahu. He gives in the time. When the time is right, he will give to the people that ask him. The important thing is to keep asking. Just because the door doesn't seem to be opening, the fact that you're asking means the door is already open. It's already open. Whether the gift has come out of the door yet or not, that's the master of the house's prerogative when he sends the gift. But the fact that you're asking means the door's open. So, now that's important because this one group was making dua, which is dhikr. In other words, they were doing dhikr. And one of the things, there's a difference between the alim and the abid and the muta'allim. You know, one of the things like at Zaytuna, for instance, people somehow they think they're going there to go to like hilaq al-dhikr, like to go and do inshad. And I tell the students right off the bat, that's not what we're doing here. Didn't I tell you that? Because you have a student right here. He says, it's not what we're doing here. That's another tariqah. If you want to do that, there's other places to go and do that for. This is for knowledge. And that's what the students of knowledge do. They study. And the best thing that they can do is memorize Quran. That time should be used for memorizing Quran, for memorizing hadith, for learning your nahu, for doing those things. That's the time that you have. And so the Prophet ﷺ sat with the people of learning because he was sent. He said, إِنَّمَا بُعِثْتُ مُعَلِّمًا. I was only sent to teach. And إِنَّمَا means only. That's why I was sent. إِنَّمَا بُعِثْتُ مُعَلِّمًا. Again, that's called qasr al-idafi. It's not qasr al-haqiqi. In other words, he was sent for other things, but he's emphasizing the importance of knowledge in his religion. This is the essence of what he came. He came to teach people how to be human. He came to connect them with their Lord. And so that's very important to understand that. Now, I'll tell you something that happened to me years ago. I was in Mauritania, and I memorized some lines from a poem that I'd heard from one of my teachers. And it was some lines from Sidi Abdullah wal Hajj Ibrahim, one of the greatest Usuli scholars of Mauritania. And he said, وَالْجَمْعُ لِلذِّكْرِ وَلِلْقُرْآنِ جَرَى بِهِ الْأَمْرُ فِي الْبُلْدَانِ وَنَصُّهُ صَحِيحٌ رَدَّ الْمُنْكَرَ وَالْعُذْرُ مِنْ خَفَائِهِ قَدْ ظَهَرَ فهو ينبغي له التمسك به ليدرك الجميع مدركه. That gathering for dhikr and to recite the Quran together, this is the urf. This is what the practice, the custom of the people throughout the lands of Islam is. And the proof for it is clear in the hadith. And those who reject it are excused because they didn't see the subtlety of the proof. And he said, but it's something that people should hold on to in order to get the benefit of it, the beauty of that. So he wrote this in this is a true story. Take it or leave it. So we were traveling from Tuaimarat to Gero, and it's a very difficult road. You know what it's like. Dr. Rayhan's been there. Aisha's been there too, Dr. Aisha. It's a very difficult road, and anyway, so one of the Mauritanians had hitchhiked a ride with us. Not literally, but he said, can I go with you? And we said, okay. So he was in the back seat, and I was in the front seat. We had a driver. We're driving. And somebody said, oh, that's the cave where Sidi Abdullah ibn Hajj Ibrahim wrote Ghayat al-Rushd. No, sorry. That's the cave where he kana yata'abbad. That's where he used to go and do retreat and other things. And it's in Tiganat. And I said, SubhanAllah, really, mashallah, there's a book I've been trying to get of his for a really long time. It's called Ghayat al-Rushd. And the man in the back from Tajikanat, he said, SubhanAllah, I just finished writing that out by hand. And he pulled it out of his bag and he handed it to me. I said, I'll buy it from you. He said, no, it's a gift. He gave it to me. Wallah alladhi la ilaha. This is a karama from Sidi Abdullah. Wallah alladhi la ilaha illahu. I picked it up and I opened it. The first thing my eye fell on was, and I wrote this book, this poem and its commentary in a cave in Taganit. That happened. So he said, and he was a truly great Usuli scholar, that this is the urf of the Muslims to gather for dhikr. As long as there's no munkar in it, it's the urf of the Muslims. And there's nothing in our tradition that says you can't do it. And Sidi Ahmad Zarruq said that the hadith of the athar of Ibn Mas'ud, where he said he saw some people in Iraq doing dhikr in a masjid, and he said, where'd you get this from? Did you surpass the companions of the Prophet ﷺ in knowledge? Sidi Ahmad Zarruq said in his Qawa'id that, first of all, what's the sanad of that? Because he said, I couldn't find a sanad for that. That's the first thing. The second thing he said, we don't know what he was actually referring to. Was it the majlis? Was it something happening in the majlis? So he said, you don't take that one athar and reject these hadiths where the Prophet said, مَجْتَمَعَ قَوْمٌ فِي بَيْتٍ مِّن بِيُوتِ اللَّهِ يَتْسُلُونَ كِتَابَ اللَّهِ, right? And in a riwayah, يَذْكُرُونَ اللَّهِ. In a riwayah, إِنَّ لِلَّهِ مَلَائِكَةً. Allah has angels, sayyarin, they travel around the earth. يَلْتَمِسُونَ حِلَقَ الذِّكْر. They're looking for the circles of dhikr. Now, some of them say, the people who reject the idea of gathering for dhikr, they say those hadiths relate to halal wal haram, learning halal and haram. But that's not what the hadith says. يَتْلُونَ كِتَابَ اللَّهِ. They recite it. And that yatluna means they're reciting it together. And that's why Imam an-Nawawi in At-Tibyan says that it's a fadila to gather and recite the Quran in one voice. It's a fadila. And he says, وَفَاضِرٌ مَنْ يَدْعُو إِلَيْهِ. And it's a virtuous man that calls people to do that. In Morocco, the minister told me that of Awqaf, they estimate in Morocco that there are 250,000 khatam in Morocco every single month because of the hizb that they do. 250,000. Now, isn't it interesting? Morocco is one of the few Muslim countries that didn't have any of these disturbances. And it was the Muwahideen that instituted that. The Muwahidun, during their ahad in the 12th century, they instituted that. It's been going on in Morocco for 1,000 years. They've been doing that for almost 1,000 years. And what, all those ulama were ignorant? All those ulama didn't know what they were talking about? They didn't read the same hadith, they didn't read the same Quran, they came up with different conclusions, or they were just mubtadi'ah? Ibn Ashir was against the hizb, not because of the hizb, but because he said they didn't practice tajweed. He wasn't against the hizb itself, but he thought they were too loose on the tajweed, that they didn't practice it. So, but the important thing from that hadith is that the Prophet ﷺ sat with the people of knowledge, those learning. That's who he sat with. So if there was another room where some people were doing dhikr or doing inshad or reciting poetry that reminded them of God in another room, and there was this circle, we would hope, based on the hadith, that the Prophet ﷺ would join this circle. And then we'd all have to beg forgiveness for being such lousy representatives of his tradition. So the first thing that it mentioned, إِذَا مَاتِ ابْنُ آدَمَ انْقَطَعَ عَمْرُهُ إِلَّا مِنْ ثَلَاثٍ عِلْمًا يُنْتَفَعُ بِهِ, or عِلْمٌ يُنْتَفَعُ بِهِ. Knowledge that is benefited from. That's the first thing mentioned, is knowledge, that's the best thing to leave behind. الدَّلُّ عَلَى الْخَيْرِ كَفَاعِلِهِ. Those who tell people where good is are like those who do good. There's no envy, meaning ghibta. There's no good envy except in two things. A man who was given knowledge and he teaches it and practices it. And a man who was given wealth and he spends it secretly and outwardly. So, And then he mentions here that Sufyan al-Thawri in the Athar, Sufyan al-Thawri, he was one of our great scholars from the 8th century Christian era. He had his own madhab, and he's one of the two of the early imams that did not, in his madhab, that you didn't give the death penalty for ridda. But he said that they used to tab abadan. You just keep telling them to make tawbah. And that was Imam Nakha'i's position also, Ibrahim al-Nakha'i, one of the great tabi'in. So, but he said, I lived in Asqalan, which is where Ibn Hajar al-Asqalani was originally from. And he said, I stayed there and nobody asked me a question. And so I said, rent my place because I need to get out of this town, because this is a place where knowledge dies. So it's a bad place when people don't want to learn. And they say that the adab al-alim is to إِذَا أَسْكَنَهُ اللَّهُ بَيْنَ الْجُهَالِ. Like the punishment of the scholar is that he lives amongst ignorant people. Hassan al-Basri, rahimahullah, said, لَوْلَا الْعُلَمَاء لَصَارَ النَّاسُ مِثْلَ الْبَهَائِمِ. If it wasn't for the scholars, people would be like animals. And we can see now what's happened. Because the loss of scholarship, people are behaving like animals. They're not teaching anymore, everywhere, all over the planet. And Imam al-Ghazali says, أي أنهم بالتعليم يخرجون الناس من حد البهيمية إلى حد الإنسانية. It's amazing ibara. He said, in other words, by teaching, they help bring out humanity from a bestial state into the state of humanity. So they bring out the people from a bestial state to the state of being human. Another important point, he says, knowledge begins with silence. The beginning of knowledge is silence. And then listening. And then retaining. And then acting in accordance with, and then spreading it. That's in Hilyat al-Awliya. It's very important. Muhammad al-Harithi said that. And that's the foundation of our tradition. It begins in silence. You can't learn. It's like the story they teach in the Japanese tradition about the man who came to learn from the martial arts teacher, and he told him who he'd been with. I've been with this man, I've been with that, and I learned this style, and then I learned this style, and he just kept going on and on. And when the tea came, he just kept pouring the tea until it was overflowing, and the student said, "Stop, it's full." He said, "What? It can't take any more?" He said, "No, it's full. The glass is full." He said, "It seems you're full too, so I don't have anything to pour into you." So the emptying out, this is called takhliya in our tradition. The Sahaba said the Prophet emptied us of jahiliyyah and filled us with Islam. So the emptying out is the beginning of learning. You have to get rid of your ignorance, because ignorance, people can be full of themselves. It's an interesting sentence that we use in English. He's full of himself, right? That's the nafs. And so how do you empty yourself of yourself so that something else can replace the ego, which is to become theocentric, to become God-centered, to get into the hub, the hub. So it begins with silence, and then it moves to listening, and then retention. You have to retain. Knowledge is retained. And that's why we study. We're a community historically of study. When Abu Dawood came to in Iraq, he was in Iraq. When he came to one of the cities there, they said that they could see thousands of ink, the midad in the masjid. Everybody was writing. People had a love for knowledge. Muslims had a love for knowledge. They would travel across the earth to learn. If they heard a man had some knowledge that they wanted, they would go to those places to learn. And then acting according to the knowledge, but that follows knowledge. And that's why we have too many activists that aren't learned. You have to learn, you have to have some basis for your action. And then finally spreading that knowledge. And it said, "Allam ilmaka man yajhalu," teach your knowledge to those who don't know, وَتَعَلَّمْ مِمَّنْ يَعْلَمْ, and learn from those who know. فَإِنَّكَ إِذَا فَعَلْتَ ذَلِكَ عَلِمْتَ مَا جَهِلْتَ وَحَفِظْتَ مَا عَلِمْتَ. If you do that, you will know what you were ignorant of, and you will retain what you have learned. And then he gives some shawahid aqliya, so that he gives you the athar, the hadith, the Quran, the hadith, and then the statements of the salihin. But then he goes to the aqliya, and he gives you a lot of just the aspects of the virtues of knowledge. And he talks about the fact that everything has capacity and ability. So if you look at the creation, we have the ability to carry things, but an ant can carry much more of its weight than we can. An ant can carry, it would be like a human being picking up a piano or a truck and carrying it. The elephant can carry far more than we can carry. And then he said that eating, there are animals that can eat far more than we can eat. Running, the cheetah can run much faster than we can run, or the deer. In all these different things that humans can do, animals can do them better. He said even the bird, in terms of its sexual appetite, far outstrips the human being. But he said, but the one thing that the man can do, that none of these animals can do, is think. And that's why this is what gives us our superiority over all creation. And we are superior, no matter how much these radical echo people want to argue that everything's the same, all life is the same on earth. It's not true. Life is precious. We should treat life, our tradition teaches us to honor the air. The Prophet ﷺ saw the janaza, marra bihi al-janaza, فقال المستريح والمستراح منه. And the Sahaba said, man mustarih wal mustarahu minhu, ya Rasulullah. This is in the Sahih. He said, what's the one who gets repose and the one who gets repose from it? And he said, al-mustarihu is the one that astaraha min nasib ad-dunya ila rahmatillah. Once he dies, he's free of the fatigue of this world, and he goes to the mercy of Allah. وَالْمُسْتَرَاحُ مِنْهُ الْعَبْدُ الْفَاجِرُ. So he said, الْعَبْدُ الْمُؤْمِنُ استراح من نصب الدنيا إلى رحمة الله. والعبد الفاجر استراح منه العباد والبلاد والدواب والشجر. والشجر والدواب. That the Abd al-Fajr, he gets repose from it, humans and lands and trees and animals. Like nature gets repose from these bad people. So when these polluters die, it's like mustarahu minhu. So we acknowledge that the creation's to be taken care of, but the human is the highest form. We believe in a hierarchy of being. And this idea that there's no hierarchy of being, no, we believe in a hierarchy of being because it indicates the ultimate in this hierarchy, which is the wujud of Allah. Allah is over everything. And then he talks about the fact that in this world, الدنيا, he said, ليس ينتظم أمر الدنيا إلا بأعمال الآدميين that the world is not organized except by the actions of the Adamic species. أعمالهم وحرفهم وصناعتهم تنحصر في ثلاثة أقسام. So their actions, this is a really important, what the distinction he's making here. All of the human actions and all of their professions and their crafts fall under three categories. The first category is the usul. These are the foundational aspects of life on earth. لا قوام للعالم دونها. That the world cannot be supported without them. And there are four. There are four of them. The first one is zira'a, agriculture. Most important because we need to eat to stay alive. So in terms of what human beings do, in terms of their actions, I mean, obviously prayer is over that and all these things, but he's talking about the world, قوام العالم. الزراعة للمطعم والحياكة للملبس. And then textiles for our clothing. والبناء وهو للمسكن or مسكن. And then the bina, engineering, building, carpentry or complex building, depends, but basically just building. And then finally سياسة وهي للتأليف والاجتماع. And that's in order to for ta'lif, to unify people. Unless they لا عقول لهم, right? تحسبهم جميعا وقلوبهم شتى. You think they're all together, but their hearts are all angry at one another. ذلك بأنهم قوم لا يعقلون, because they're not using their intellect. Politics is a very positive thing. It's not a negative thing. Politics is one of the great gifts of Allah. لكن الله ذو فضل على العالمين. لولا دفع الله الناس بعضهم ببعض لفسدت الأرض. Had it not been some people preventing others, or difa' in the riwayah, preventing others from harming, you would have seen the world in complete corruption. And then Allah says, but Allah has dhu fadl. He has bounty over all of His creation. Why? If you read what the Mufassirun say, because aqam al-hukumat. He put governments in place. Allah put them in place so that we didn't have brigands that killed people indiscriminately, so that we felt secure in our lives and our homes. This is the purpose of government. So when government stops doing that, right, it becomes a tyranny. And then the question is, do you overthrow the government or not? If you're Hobbesian, you don't. If you're Lockean, in the Western tradition, if you're following Hobbes said, no, if you overthrow it, it'll be worse, anarchy. Locke said, the hell with it. If they're not fulfilling their function, we have a right to overthrow them. Right? Those are two different views. What did the Muslims say? Huh? They're more Hobbesian, historically. In the early period, they were more Lockean. But because there was so much problems that came out of it, they moved towards the Hobbesian view of things. And now we're in it's more Calvin and Hobbes. It's just madness. It's crazy. Because they say, oh, that tradition was just put in place to control people, and so Malik was just a control mechanism. Sufyan al-Thawri was just a control mechanism. I mean, these are people that were willing to die for their beliefs. None of them had anything to do with government. Abu Hanifa wouldn't go near the government. They all spent time either in jail or being punished. This idea somehow that they were co-opted. It's a slander against them. None of them. So Imam Malik said that just a short period of the 60 years in an oppressive situation is better than a short period in anarchy. And that they're more Burkean in that, to use a modern term, Edmund Burke. They were conservative in their approach because Allah says, لا تلقوا بأيديكم إلى التهلكة. Right? Don't throw yourselves to tahluka. Now, it's true that one of them said it was tarkul jihad, which is true, leaving jihad, because that will destroy you if you don't defend yourselves. Thawri, by the way, only believed in defensive jihad. He didn't believe in offensive jihad. Sufyan al-Thawri. And that was Ibn Taymiyyah's position also. The other ones believed in a type of preemptive, if they thought there was a threat. The Arab proverb, الروم إذا لا تغزى تغزو. You know, if you don't attack them first, they're going to attack you eventually. So it's better just to try it, because they're belligerent. They were called the Umam al-Mutawahisha. Europeans. They were called the wild, bestial nations. The Muslims were very civilized. They had nice economic situation. They could go to China and have commerce with the Chinese, drink green tea, sit down, friends. They didn't force them to sell opium like the English. You know what's interesting about the Opium Wars? Do you know about the Opium Wars? Yeah. Do you know about them? What's interesting about the Opium Wars is the Chinese minister was convinced that these British were obviously brigands, drug dealers. They were like the scum of the earth. So they sent the emperor had a delegation go to England to, like, you know, get them to help them get rid of these drug dealers. And they found out that they were actually all in the employment of the government, of all the people in parliament. So they got a little confused. Right? That's like America. You know, the tobacco companies made a deal in America. We'll let you destroy the tobacco industry in America, but help us spread tobacco all over the world. So Thailand, their Minister of Health tried to outlaw these tobacco commercials, which in America, right, you can't do these commercials anymore. And they were told that by the US that if you do that, your aid's going to be suspended. They said our Ministry of Health can't deal with we have too many people getting emphysema and all these diseases, and that's the deal, because Thailand's Marlboro country. So anyway, how do we get onto that? That's the Irish in me, always got to give digs to the English. And I'm a green, right? Southern Ireland. So now, this is very important also here. So that was about the politics. And then he says the second are those things that help the first. Like hidada, like being, you know, a smith, making tools and weapons and things like that. Because that helps agriculture and other ones. And then hidaja, like carding wool, and ghazal, making the looms and things like that. And then he said, and then there are those that complete it, like tahan, khab, zira'a, like bakeries and mills to grind the food, wal qisara, carding, khiyata, tailors, and hiyaka, which is making the textiles again. So then he says, that أشرف هذه الصناعات أصولها وأشرف أصولها السياسة. The most important of all these things that humans do are the usul. And of the four usul, eating, animals do that. Clothing, animals have fur and feathers. Buildings, animals make nests and burrows and things. The only thing that distinguishes animals have organization, but they don't have it in the way we do. So they have a system, but it's all by instinct. So siyasa is what makes us unique. Now there are two types of siyasa. There's siyasatun nafs, controlling the self. Inni ja'ilun fil ardi khalifa. First you have to be a khalifa over yourself, and then there's the siyasa of other people. So the father and the mother are the khalifa in the house. The children are the ra'iyah. They're the subjects of the house. Or if you live in some countries, they're more like citizens, where you ask them what they want for dinner. Like some countries, they don't ask kids, what do you want for dinner? They just get dinner, and they eat it or they go to bed without dinner. But in some countries, what would you like for dinner? Oh, you don't want that? Okay, I'll make that, right? I mean, some Muslim countries, they roll their eyes when they see that. But that's part of the democratization of a culture. Epstein has a theory of governance called congruence theory. And what he argues in that theory is that governments only work to the degree with which whatever the modality of governance is being applied at the societal level, the same model has to permeate all the institutions of the society. So if you have a dictatorial model, if you have a dictator, you need dictators in the schools, teaching the children. You need dictators in the homes, treating the kids like tyrants. Because then it'll work, because this is just the way life is. But if you have in the house, if you have a society where shura is part of it, what does Ibrahim say to Ismail? إِنِّي أَرَى فِي الْمَنَامِ أَنِّي أَذْبَحُكَ. Right? I saw in the dream that I'm slaughtering. انظر ما ترى. Look and tell me what you think about that. He was a young boy, but his father's asking him because this is how people are enculturated into a culture of shura, which is the way of the prophets. They're not dictators. They recognize that human beings have intellect, right? They have free choice. Dictatorship doesn't acknowledge free choice. No, you just do what I'm telling you to do and don't ask why. If you have a parent like that, he's probably generally either a military parent, which is you need that. That's the way militaries work because they're like dictatorships. Or he's from a country that had a dictator over it, right? So, كيف ما تكونوا يولى عليكم. There's Epstein's theory in a hadith. As you are, so are the people put over you. It has to be congruent. أعمالكم عمالكم. Your actions determine your rulers. Nobody wants to hear that. No, our rulers are oppressors. We're not oppressors. I'm not oppressing. Right? And then you see him at the job. يا أحمق جيب لي هذا أنت إيش فيك؟ أنت مجنون? All that attitude towards subordinates, people under you. Or how about the way you treat your servant in the house? How are you treating them? I mean, I've been in Muslim countries where it's 24/7. There's no breaks. They just wake them up anytime. Am I making this up? I'm not making it up. So then you wonder, كيف ما تكونوا ولا عليكم? No, change. We have to change ourselves. إن الله لا يغير ما بقوم حتى يغيروا ما بأنفسهم. Allah doesn't change your conditions. He changes conditions. We don't change conditions. He's not going to change our conditions until we change ourselves. That's what He gave us taklif. Why are we so bothered about changing our conditions when that's not our taklif? Nobody wants to change themselves. Nobody wants to do that work. Because it's really hard. Nobody wants to do it though. It's a fascinating situation. And then these horrible things happen and we're like, keeps happening. Why does it keep happening? Well, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, وَلَمَّا أَصَابَتْكُم مُّصِيبَةٌ قَدْ أَصَبْتُم مِّثْلَيْهَا قُلْتُمْ أَنَّ هَذَا. Sahaba, when they got afflicted at Uhud and they had done twice against them at Badr, they said, how'd this happen? We won at Badr. Why'd this happen? قُلْ هُوَ مِنْ عِنْدِ أَنفُسِكُمْ. It's from your own selves. Don't blame anybody but yourself. And people say that's blaming the victim. Well, show me the victim, the true victim. And that's not to negate that there are right and wrong sides. That's not negating that. Palestinian issue, it's not negating it. There's a right and a wrong side there. That's not negating that. And if I speak to to Israelis, that's what I would tell them. You're dhalimun. What you're doing is wrong. You're occupying land that's not yours. You're treating people in horrible conditions. But if I talk to my brothers and sisters, I have to remind myself and them, this is what our book says. Are we doing everything to get Allah on our side? Because the problem with Muslims for me is we just assume God's on our side. We don't have a God that's tribal. That's another religion has a tribal God. He prefers one tribe over others. That's not our religion. We don't have a tribal God. Our God is not tribal. Allah is with the righteous. لَا يَنَالُ عَهْدِيَ الظَّالِمِينَ. My covenant is not extended to oppressors. And that doesn't just mean oppressing others, it means oppressing yourselves too. مَا ظَلَمْنَاهُمْ. We didn't oppress them. وَلَكِنْ هُمْ أَنفُسُهُمْ كَانُوا يَظْلِمُونَ. They oppress their own souls. So, what time is it? Oh. How do you oppress yourself? The main way that we oppress ourselves is by it's by allowing the shahwa and the ghadab to take over. Because Allah gave us a hakim. And the hakim is our higher self. And if we allow our lower self to take charge, if we allow the horse to become the rider, we've oppressed ourselves. Because He gave us the ability to do that. And I once asked Marabt al-Hajj, when I was reading a poem with him, يُجَاهِدُ نَفْسًا لِرَبِّ الْعَالَمِينَ وَيَتَحَلَّ بِمَقَامَاتِ الْيَقِينَ خَوْفٌ رَجًا شُكْرٌ خَوْفٌ رَجًا شُكْرٌ وَصَبْرٌ تَوْبَةٌ زُهْدٌ تَوَكُّلٌ رِضًا مَحَبَّةٌ. So I'm reading this with him, and he said about that verse, he said, أَنَّ عَلَى الْمَرْءِ أَنْ يُجَاهِدْ نَفْسُهُ ويغلب نفسه حتى تستسلم له وتنقاد لأوامر الله وتجتنب نواهي الله. So he said that you have to fight yourself and overcome it until it's in obedience with Allah, it's in conformity with Allah. And I said, وَإِنْ كَانَتْ النَّفْسُ غَالِبًا. That's what I asked him. I said, what do we do when the nafs just is getting the better of it? He said, هي الحرب. He said, this is the war. What did the Prophet, when they asked Abu Sufyan about the war between him and the Prophet, he said, Al-Harbu Sijal. It's a war of attrition. One day they win, one day we win. The war with the nafs is Sijal. It's a war of attrition. You have to keep, and so what he said is, لا يكلف الله نفسا إلا وسعها. He wouldn't give us the taklif if we couldn't do it. وَالَّذِينَ جَاهَدُوا فِينَا لَنَهْدِيَنَّهُمْ سُبُلَنَا وَإِنَّ اللَّهَ وَاللَّهُ مَعَ الصَّابِرِينَ. Allah is with the people of sabr. Because it's sabr, musabira. What's sabr? Sabr ala ta'a wa sabr an al-ma'asi. It's to be patient in the state of obedience and to be patient in avoidance of disobedience. And that's mujahada. And nafs al-lawama is where most of us should be. We should at least be in the fight. But too many of us aren't even in the fight. We're nafs al-ammara. And so, and another thing, I benefited greatly from a statement that Sheikh Abdullah bin Bayya once said. We were in an airport in Kuwait. And this Jordanian, he was an athlete. very physically fit. He was with a soccer team, I think, and they were coming to play in Kuwait. And he saw the sheikh was sitting there. He was, Sheikh Abdullah, he always just recites Quran. Like, if you're with him, I've been with him, days on end, and he's just, if you're not asking him a question, if he's not reading or doing ibadah, he's yatlu kitab Allah. And sometimes he does his subha, but generally it's Quran. And so he saw him, and mashallah, Sheikh Abdullah, if you see him, he has an effect on you. So he walked over to him and he said, Sheikh, can I ask you a question? He said, Tafaddal. He said, astaghfirullah, I'm trying to be a good Muslim, but I just find myself doing ma'asiyah. And I just feel bad, and just, can you give me some advice? And Sheikh Abdullah just said, istamir, akhi, istamir. Just keep on. You're on the path. He feels bad, that's a good sign. The problem is when they don't feel bad. So that's the real dhulm. And too many of us are in that state. Now, obviously, one of the philosophers that really troubled me was Nietzsche when I read him, because Nietzsche makes a really interesting point about one of the things that religion does is that it puts it on, it blames the victim, you see. But the reality of that is that the opposite of it is a demonic view, and that's where Iblis is, because Iblis blames everybody but himself. He blames God. Why'd you choose Adam over me? He blames man. He never will take responsibility. But Adam and Hawa, the first thing they did when they made the mistake, I wronged myself. Yunus, the first thing he did, right? Inni kuntu min al-zalimin. He said it. He wasn't a zalim. How was he zalim? Right? So that's really important for us to remember. That's the prophetic minhaj, is to blame the self. The demonic minhaj is to blame everybody else. That doesn't mean that we don't take sides in these things. But I'm looking at it from a metaphysical perspective because too many of us are looking at it from a political perspective. The political perspective is valid. Undeniably, it is a valid perspective, and I'm not denying that perspective. It's true and it's real. There are wrongdoers. A woman in a house who's being punished by, beaten by her husband is a zalim. But what does she do about the situation? That's where Islam is very empowering. Because if she doesn't, she should have recourse to a judge who will resolve the situation. But if she doesn't, or an asaba, her male relatives, but if she doesn't, what does she do? She does what Asiya did, who called on Allah about Fir'aun. She was in Fir'aun's house, she couldn't do anything, and she just said, وَابْنِي لِي بَيْتًا فِي الْجَنَّةِ, give me a house in Jannah, because this house isn't working out. That's a different perspective, So let me just finish this and then we'll end. He mentions here السياسة في اصطلاح الخلق وإرشادهم إلى الطريق المستقيم المنجي في الدنيا والآخرة على 4 مراتب. And he took this from Raghib al-Isfahani, and this to me was one of the most interesting sections in Ad-Dhari'ah, which was a book that affected him heavily, Imam al-Ghazali. So Raghib in the Dhari'ah says that there are basically 4 types of leadership. There's 4 types of siyasa. Al-ula wa hiya al-ulya siyasatul anbiya. The first and the highest is the siyasa of the prophets. And in Sahih Bukhari it says that the prophets of Bani Israel used to yasusuhum. They were the leaders, the prophets, till they asked for the king. And then Samuel asked for them to be given a king. وحكمهم على الخاصة والعامة جميعا في ظاهرهم وباطنهم. Their ruling, the power of the Anbiya is on the elite and the common people. The elect and the vulgar. It's on everybody, inwardly and outwardly. So they rule the outward and the inward of humanity. That's why we're supposed to obey them outwardly and inwardly. الثانية الخلفاء والملوك والسلاطين والرؤساء. Now, The second are the caliphs, the kings, the sultans, the presidents. وحكمهم على خاصة والعامة جميعا ولكن على ظاهرهم لا على باطنهم. Their ruling is on everybody, the elect and the common, but only on their outward. They control the outward of these people. الثالثة العلماء بالله عز وجل وبدينه. In Raghib calls them the hukama, the wise ones, which would have been synonymous for philosopher at that time. He calls them the ulama billah, the people that know God, the scholars that know God and know His religion. الذين هم ورثة الأنبياء وحكم على باطن الخاصة فقط. Their ruling is on the internal states of the elect. باطن الخاصة فقط. لا يرتفع فهم العامة إلى الاستفادة منهم. Because common people can't really benefit from them. Their understanding is too rarefied for the common people. They don't benefit from them. ولا تنتهي قوتهم إلى التصرف في ظواهرهم بالإلزام والمنع. And they don't have the ability to force people to follow them, like the Salatin do, the rulers. والرابعة, and this Raghib says these are the most dangerous, الوعاظ, the preachers. And we would include in this category today all these news editorial people, giving their opinions, people like Bill O'Reilly, these type people. They go under this category. And Glenn Beck, what's that woman, terrible blonde-haired lady? Yeah, Ann Coulter, people like that. These people, what he says about them, حكمهم على بواطن العوام. They affect the emotions of the common people. You see, because they're demagogues. And preachers are like that, whether they're Muslim, Christian, Jewish, whatever they are. In those churches and things like that, in the mosques, where they're riling people up, getting them angry. What Raghib says is that they need to have, the wa'adh have to be regulated by the ulama billah. They have to have guides from amongst these ulama billah to control them, to give them hikmah, to help them. Alhamdulillah. So, yeah. Yeah.
So, in her situation, in today's church, if Quran leaves the house and does haram,
Yeah.
there's some kind of hadith that says it affects my dong, my transportation, it affects my home, it affects my. There's three things that I. Oh, I'm sorry.
Yeah. Alaikum assalam.
Leaves the home, is there an impact to the home where there's someone like Asya or a mom, and that's a halal home, but this person leaves and they do their masiyah outside of the house?
Yeah. No, it's going to affect, it'll affect the house, especially if his livelihood is haram. The food's affected by haram livelihood. The state of the person, because people just their state, the hal of the person is going to affect you. If you're around dark people, you get affected by them. If you're around people of goodness, you're affected by them. If you're around depressed people, you get affected by them. Depressed people are like, if they're really depressed, they're like a black hole. It's really hard to get them out of that too. And then, you hang around Imam Zayd, you're feeling happy and, like a house without a roof. I don't know why you'd be happy if you had a house without a roof. Be pretty miserable, especially in a rainy country. Does that make sense? Yeah. Any other questions? A few more questions, then we'll pray. Mm-hmm.
The same people who would choose the opinion of 2 versus 1,000 have discredited and rejected the work of Imam al-Ghazali.
They don't like Imam al-Ghazali.
On what grounds?
It's a good question. I think largely, and to be fair, I'm actually ambidextrous, so I kind of tend to, I'm not I like to look at both sides. I always read both sides of arguments. I really do. I don't just take a position just because rah-rah. To be fair to that side of the argument, they're extremely conservative, and they really felt like Islam had been under siege by all these other traditions. And there's a lot of truth to that. And so they wanted to, what they felt was all this stuff came into the religion that we needed to purify it of. So by the 7th century, Ibn Taymiyyah was saying this Hellenistic thought got in here and it's really affected the way the ulama think. Well, he's considered the main man that did it, because he was so brilliant. He was really able to help the Seljuks get the Ash'ari Aqidah to become the predominant Aqidah, even though it was extensive, but he really sealed it. He also introduced logic into Usul al-Fiqh. He is extremely Aristotelian in his approach to the organization of knowledge, and anybody who's read Aristotle will see the influence. So they really felt that, and then they felt that he was influenced by Plotinus and Neoplatonic thought. They felt he was influenced by the Batiniya because he studied the Ismailiyya pretty seriously, even though he refuted them. So for some reason, they really feel that he's the main problem, which is unfortunate because in the golden age of Islam, he was Hujjat al-Islam. I mean, he really was considered to be one of the greatest teachers of Islam. In the closest person to him in Christendom is probably St. Thomas Aquinas, just in terms of his impact on the Catholic Church. And he borrowed heavily from Ghazali. So, and that is simply a fact. And they both borrowed from Ibn Sina, because he's influenced by Ibn Sina, undeniably. And Ibn Taymiyyah had a serious problem with Ibn Sina, his metaphysics. But he took what was beneficial from Ibn Sina, and he had the discriminatory capacity to distinguish between the haqq and the batil there. So he benefited from what was beneficial. وَالْحِكْمَةُ ضَالَّةُ الْمُؤْمِنِ. So I mean, that's at the root of the problem, is that, but we need to live together. You know, they're not going away, and we're not going away. We need to live together. This is the normative tradition of our faith for about 1,200 years. It's only in the last 100 years that this has really started to change. There is a strain, undeniably. It's very small, but it has been there. You've always had a group of Hanabila that were against, and also against the Ash'ari. Also, look, Ibn Abd al-Barr, who's one of the great scholars of the West, and he was Hafiz, and nobody would say that he was not a Sunni. And if they did, that they would be a Mubtada'. He was very anti-Ash'ari kalam. So this whole idea that there's not other opinions is also false. The Athari position is an acceptable position. And I think the reason I translated the Aqidah Tahawiyya is because it's a very basic Athari text, and it's pretty much agreed upon. There's differences about how it's interpreted, but it's pretty much agreed upon. And for the vast majority of people, that is the best Aqidah to follow, with a sound commentary, like Al-Ghunaymi's. Ibn Abd al-Izz, his commentary, which is useful for ulama, it's got some real problems, though, in it. But when you get into refutation, you need dialectical theology. This idea that we don't need dialectical theologians is insane. And we don't have any, and it's a real problem because we have quantum physics is there now. We've got evolution, you know, and it's not enough just to say, it's just kufr, a'udhu billah. If you believe in that, brother, you're going to hell. It doesn't work for a microbiologist who's struggling with his faith because he's being very convinced by a lot of the arguments that he's reading. He needs a little more than that, right? And so you need a theologian who also happens to be a serious microbiologist to be able to really give us a sound opinion on something like that. So we need dialectical theologians. I'm convinced of that. And our tradition was very strong in that area. I mean, if you read the At-Tusi, if you read the Al-Maqasid, Taftazani's commentary, it's amazing what they talked about and what they were grappling with. So, clear? Any other? Mm-hmm.
Wait for the mic.
Yeah?
I was going to say, when you're pursuing knowledge, would you recommend going for perhaps a Western university degree and then going for ilm, or going with ilm first and then going for a university degree?
I think we should be a little bit like in the West, a little bit like the Mormons. You know, before we send our kids to the university, they should do some like 2-year training. Like I would not send an 18-year-old into an American university without some real understanding of his religion, because there's people in these universities that are just masters of sophistry, and they can really run rings around simplistic arguments for faith. And I mean, I'll give you an example, because one of my sons studied biology this summer, and you know, the teacher didn't believe in God. And you know, these are 15-year-olds studying, but the teacher didn't believe in God, and he's talking about his views on it. Well, if our 15-year-olds are being exposed to that at the high school level, what's going to happen at the university when they take their intro to philosophy or sociology, or you know, a class in physics, and the cosmologist happens to be an atheist and has read, you know, Dawkins and the New Atheists, and starts espousing these things. And some of the Muslims have been fooled by these people. What's interesting to me is these people aren't new. None of them are new. There's no new ideas in atheism. In fact, the atheists of today are far less rigorous than the atheists of the past. I mean, Nietzsche, if you want an atheist, you know, just read Nietzsche. Don't read him. Yeah. But, yeah, I mean, well, everything's gone to pot, including the atheists, right? So that's what Robbie George said. Yeah.
Assalamu
Alaikum.
For many of us who are studying in Western universities, we attend such classes and we have a strong desire to pursue Islamic studies, but we don't know where to go. Mm-hmm. We don't know how to go about it. Yeah. We could go to the Arab world, go through trial and error.
What Arab world? Where can you go right now?
Someone told me Jordan.
Jordan, you're kind of surrounded.
So how can we get guidance for that? You know, how do we know how to go about this to pursue Islamic studies? And there are people out there who have the passion for it, they just don't know how to funnel it.
Well, we're going to get, inshallah, in here about fard ayn and fard kifaya, because he makes very important distinctions. And so it's important to know what's fard ayn. Everybody has to learn that, and then know what's fard kifaya. You shouldn't be studying anything if you're an adult and you don't know your fard ayn. I mean, alhamdulillah, a lot of what we're learning here is fard ayn. You know, the Aqidah class. I mean, that Aqidah class, inshallah, was Omar teaching it? Sidi Omar? Yeah, and that should be enough for, if you go home and review it and go over it, that should be enough just in terms of basic creed. It's not faith. Aqidah is not iman, right? It's just a creedal formulation that you learn. I mean, an Orientalist can know it better than we can sometimes. So, and then, you know, prayer and tahara and those things. You have to learn all those things. But when you want to pursue advanced studies in Islam, for me, you can't do it at the university. You're going to learn a different methodology. We have our own methodology. So, I mean, when I argued for my theses, you know, I had a committee, you know, one of these doctoral committees. And, you know, one of the professors kind of challenged the just the methodology the broadness that I was trying to, and I just explained, look, this is our tradition. I'm using something from within our tradition. The others were fine with it. So that's an example where, in Western academia, everything's about, in social sciences, when you study religion or anything, philosophy, it's all about methodology. What methodology? Because scientific methodology is all clear. If you're studying in the sciences, it's all clear. But in the other sciences, humanities, social sciences, most of it's predicated on critical theory. Most of it's predicated on nominalism. These are very much opposed to our tradition. And so it's very difficult if you don't know what these things are first and foremost. Because a lot of people go into the university, they don't know that they're getting a philosophy, they're getting a worldview. Because my argument is, if you don't philosophize for yourself, somebody's going to philosophize for you. Everybody's doing philosophy. So this idea that we're not, everybody's living a philosophy. People now are relativists. Where did they get those ideas from? Where did they get relativism from? 100 years ago, people weren't relativists. Where did it come from? Oh, I just thought of it myself. I'm just such a brilliant genius. What's good for you is good for you. What's good for me, Colin? You have your way, I have my way. It's all relative. What, you came up with that yourself? What? Genius man? That's something somebody grew up with or heard it or learned it at school and made sense to them or something like that. Mm-hmm.
If we do want to pursue traditional studies, where do we go?
Well, I would say the best place for traditional studies in Islam, the very best place, is the desert of Mauritania. It has serious limitations. I'm very aware of that. But the reason that it's such an interesting madrasa is it's a pre-modern madrasa. So there's still teachers, there are not a lot of them left, but there's still teachers there that have they don't know anything in the modern tradition. So their views are pre-modern. Now, you get somebody like Sheikh Abdullah bin Bayya, who was raised on that tradition and got it up to about 21 and mastered it, but then he went and learned all the Western things. So that's why he's so formidable. Because he became a man of his time as well as being a man of all time. Because our tradition is for all time. But you also have to know the age you're living in. And this is where it gets difficult. Now, many of our scholars in the Muslim world have been heavily influenced by Marxism. They don't know it, but they have. A lot of the Islamic movements, if you look at the ideologues behind them, they were actually influenced by fascism. They were reading fascist literature. They were influenced by Marxism. There were some very, very famous writers in the Islamic tradition. Ali Shariati is a good example in the Shia tradition. He went to Sorbonne. He studied with all these Marxists. Wow, this is amazing. Yeah, that sounds like Abu Dhar. And so he started making these connections. Well, there's truth in Marxism. It's not like it's all false. It couldn't have fooled so many people for so long if it was all false. No, there's truth in it. The devil always uses truth. He's always going to mix truth with falsehood. It'll be 80% true, 20% false. But there's a lot of problems with it. And then it clouds your understanding. Now, people can say that about me. Well, you're influenced by West Coast liberal tradition. I grew up my mom was an activist, civil rights movement, anti-war movement, ecological movement. I was brainwashed with all that stuff as a kid. So, yeah, that's going to influence me. People, we're affected by our environment. I'm not going to deny that. But we should, to the best of our ability, try to perceive these things as God intended them to be for us. And there's going to be differences of opinion, undeniably. That's the nature of the mind and humans. And so, but that, for me, Mauritania is it's a very good place to, especially for. But then it has its limitations because you can't take Mauritanian fiqh and think that you can go to America and just apply fiqh that was working in the Mauritanian desert for Bedouin people and think that's going to work in an advanced industrial or post-industrial society, because it doesn't work like that. So it has its limitations. Turkey has some really good madrasas here that are still functioning. It's an Ajami country, so it's got that limitation because the Arabics, but they have good Arabic tradition. They learn Arabic to a very high level. Jordan still has a few traditional scholars left. Iraq had some really good scholars, but unfortunately it's just a disaster. Syria was probably one of the best places to go to, but it's a disaster. Yemen was a very good place to go to. A lot of problems there. But all of these countries have limitations with their methodology, all of them. And we all do, so it's a confusing time. And what we're trying to do at Zaytuna is a hybrid model, because we're in the West and we should know where we are, and the West is also the dominant civilization right now, so we have to understand it and what it's done to us and the impact it's had on us, and what our critique, because we need Occidentalists. They've got Orientalists. We need Occidentalists. We need people to study them. If you want to see a really interesting documentary, there's a documentary done by a North Korean psychiatrist who just analyzes America as a North Korean isolationist, showing how, you're calling us evil? Like North Korea, we're the evil axis? Why don't you guys look at yourselves? Look at your own culture. Look how your own people have been degraded. You don't want to talk about that, just how degraded our culture has come. I know Australia is not much better, huh? Yeah. But it's not down under, because we actually originally had the maps, the south was on the top. So we're actually down under, you're up over. Assalamu alaikum. Subhanakallahumma wa bihamdika ashhadu an la ilaha illa anta astaghfiruka wa atubu ilayk.